book of Leviticus has given us lots of laws, lots of direction that the people of old, the Israelites, were to follow. And we've talked about some of those things. We've focused, I guess, a great deal on sacrifices and those types of things. Why did God want sacrifices?
He wanted them to know how to give what they had, no matter what.
Okay, all right. Taught them how to give. What else?
It reminded them of their sins.
Okay, reminded them of their sins. What about their reliance upon the Father? Showed that they should rely upon Him. They're still at the foot of Mount Sinai, right? Sinai wilderness, waiting for direction from the Lord to move when that time comes. What is He providing for them?
Everything that they need
Okay.
for right now.
Okay. All right. What are some of those things that they need?
Food, for one.
Okay. Food. In the form of what?
Manna
Manna.
and quail.
Quail. Okay. What else? Is He providing water for them?
Yeah.
Okay. Is He providing for their health? He is, isn't He? Is He providing for their spiritual welfare?
Most definitely.
Okay. All right. And so that's the most important thing, isn't it? Those last things that we talked about, God providing for us, providing for the Israelites, has that changed today any?
Not at all.
We don't eat manna, and we don't eat, sometimes we might eat quail. I don't know if any of you had quail, I have. But He provides for us, doesn't He? And in our day and time, generally speaking, that is in the form of financial provision. And then we take those finances and we go and purchase what we need, right? You ever think about God providing for that for you? You ever pray to Him and thank Him for those material blessings? George?
I was just going to remark that where I work, they always got confused about what they needed and what they wanted. They thought what they wanted was, should be provided as well. That's one thing outside the complaining in the wilderness, God provided well for them. They got what they wanted more than they complained about what they wanted more than what they needed.
Okay. Are you when you're talking about they, are you referring to your coworkers? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
of course.
Dustin?
I would say I don't pray for the financial part of things. Usually my prayers at night, I pray for a good night's rest, the strength to get through the day, safety for those around me and myself, and things that lead to it. So I think those things are provided because that is the ultimate outcome of it. That comes through prayer and help from God.
Good. All right. Any other comments about that? Okay, so as we continue on in the book of Leviticus, we'll continue to find this reminder over and over and over that the people of Israel were to have one God, and that was Jehovah. And they were to have no other gods before them, and that comes up in our study today. And so as we get into chapter 24, the first couple of verses, the passage states, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the sons of Israel." So again, He's giving Moses information that he's to go and tell, this is what the Lord commands. Now, if we'll skip down to, I believe it's, let's see, maybe the end of 26. Let me look. Yes. Chapter 26 and verse 46. The passage states, "These are the statutes and ordinances and laws which the Lord established between himself and the sons of Israel through Moses at Mount Sinai." So you remember when we talked about Moses being up on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. He actually did that on 2 occasions. We thought, surely it doesn't take that long to impart the 10 Commandments. And of course it didn't. But we're continuing to learn as we go along through this book, Exodus, this book, and even into Numbers and Deuteronomy, that there are other things that the Lord commanded the people. And so I just want us to be reminded of that all of these things that the Lord told Moses, he told him on Mount Sinai. And so Moses now comes down and he's in the process of imparting these things to the people. And granted, as we go through Leviticus, we have some, if you would like to call it that, I don't know really if it technically is this, so maybe some parenthetical things that he throws in. We don't see that today in connection with the son of the Israelitish woman. But he'll put a story in here in the midst of some commandments, and then he'll go back and list some commandments again. And so, interesting way that Moses communicates all these things to us through the Scriptures. But nonetheless, they're very important for us to consider and recognize how that God gave and commanded Moses all of these things while they were on the mountain. And so now, as we continue on in our study, let's look at chapter 24. Chapter 24 really brings about the information of maintaining the lampstand, the oil for that, the bread of the sanctuary, or what we refer to as the King James Version translates it, the table of showbread, or the showbread that resided on the table in the holy place. So how all of these things were to be done, how they were to be maintained down to the minutest of details, Jehovah gave Moses this commandment while he was with him on the mountain. And so the people were, as we talked about last Sunday morning, the people were to sacrifice that oil. They were to bring that oil, beaten olive oil, to the priest so that they could prepare the oil for the lampstand. Aaron attended to that daily. It would burn continually. So this is something that had to be done day in and day out. It had to be checked on throughout the day. And Aaron and those that were high priests following him were given that task to check on that daily. Now, among other things that had to be done were the daily sacrifices and all those things, right? And so imagine when the Day of Atonement comes, and all of those sacrifices have to be offered. Aaron gets to go into the most holy place with blood before the Lord for the atonement of the sins of the people. Then he has to sacrifice. Previous to that, he sacrificed the morning sacrifice. And then at the evening, he sacrificed the evening sacrifice. He's keeping up with the lampstand and the table of incense. The table of showbread is taken care of weekly. But all of these things are going on. And so when we read through Leviticus and we see that some things refer to Aaron himself specifically, and then he says when the priest offers this or whatever, there may be other priests, Aaron's sons, that are offering sacrifices on the altar of burnt offering. So there was a lot to be done, is the point I'm making. And so as we continue on, he talks about the table of showbread. Fine flour was to be used to bake 12 cakes. Now, how did they come about this flour? I mean, the Levites were not agrarian. They were not agriculture in nature. They were priestly. It came from the people, didn't it? And so the people would bring forth that fine flour, and they would use that to bake 12 cakes. These cakes, and before I go any further, why 12?
12 tribes of Israel.
Okay, represented the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And so after those 12 cakes were baked, They were brought in, placed on the table of showbread. They were placed in 2 rows, 6 to the row upon the table. Now, what size they were specific, we don't know. All we know is that's what was done. It was put on the table of showbread. They also brought pure frankincense in and put those upon each cake and each row, or each loaf of bread, or however you want to term that, on the table of showbread. And the bread was changed out each Sabbath. Now, what was done with the bread that was changed out?
Moses and, Aaron and the priest ate it.
Okay, all right, it was given to the priest. Now, if we leave bread out on the table at our house, what happens after 2 or 3 days?
It's stale or moldy or both.
Yeah, right. And it might even, depending on the circumstances, might even attract bugs, right? But in the table, in the holy place, that bread that was prepared to God's instructions, according to his instruction, placed there, did not spoil. And you say, well, part of that must have been because of the unleavened nature of it. Maybe so, but I kind of doubt that.
Yeah.
Do you think they had any bugs in the wilderness of Sinai?
No.
Surely they did. But the Lord kept that preserved for the bread of the priests. They were able to eat that. They were not getting sick because they were eating moldy or bad bread. And so that was done on every Sabbath day. Now, here is that parenthetical information that I'm talking about, if you will. Moses takes just a moment to talk about an event that occurred, and this has nothing to do really with unleavened bread. It has nothing to do with oil for the lampstand, but it is an important lesson that the people learn in connection with that. And so we begin in verse 10. I want to read just a little bit. Now the son of an Israelite woman, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the sons of Israel, and the Israelite woman's son and a man of Israel struggled with each other in the camp. And the son of the Israelite woman blasphemed the name and cursed, so they brought him to Moses. Now his mother's name was Shelomith, the daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. And they put him in custody so that the command of the Lord might be made clear to them. So here's this son of this Israelite woman who had previously been married to this Egyptian man, may have still been, we don't know for sure. But they had a child, it was a son, and this son grew up and he got to the age where he was able to walk among the people, the men of Israel, and they fought. He fought with an Israelite man. And so, for whatever reason, the son blasphemed the Lord's name, and he cursed. So they brought him to Moses because he had profaned the Lord's name. What was one of the 10 Commandments in connection with this?
Be put to death.
Okay, but what the specific commandment, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain.
All right, thou shalt not take the name of thy Lord in vain. So they brought him, this first time evidently this has happened, so they bring this man to Moses, and so Moses says, let's put him in ward, or let's lock him up until we can find out what Jehovah would have us to do about this situation. And so Moses was commanded by Jehovah to bring him outside the camp. Now, when you hear that phrase, outside the camp, there's 2 or 3 things that come to mind, right? First of all, we talk about outside the camp, where there is an unclean place, where the lepers lived, and other things that were unclean were taken out there in that particular area. And then there was a clean place where the sacrifice of the bullock, the remainder of that bullock was taken out and it was burned holy in that area. Also the place where the altar of burnt offering ashes were placed. So it could be a good situation, could be a bad situation. But in connection with this man, he had cursed the name of Jehovah, and so when they take him outside the camp, I think it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. There's going to be some kind of punishment rendered. And so Jehovah said to Moses, he said, you take the witnesses that saw this incident and you have them lay their hands upon this Israelite woman's son. Notice the Lord does not call, nor does Moses call this man an Israelite. He calls him a son of an Israelite because there was a mixed marriage there with an Egyptian. And so when after they put their hands on his head, they're actually conveying guilt and their responsibility to him. Then they take him and they stone him. This capital punishment was a law that was strictly enforced by Moses and his law, as was the murder of a person. This was a strict law as well. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. So this is at least the second time we've talked about capital punishment. And it was carried out at the command of Jehovah through Moses to the people. And so it's very interesting that those that were involved, that is, those that were witnesses, were the ones that would actually turn then and stone this person to death. What does the New Testament say? And we read this passage not long ago. What does the New Testament say about one being put to death at the hands of witnesses?
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. In Hebrews, I believe it is correct. But it said, under Moses' law, a person was put to death under two or three witnesses. How much sword or punishment would we suffer?
Right. That's right. That's right. And so we see then that this was a very grave error that this man had made in this connection with not only, did he go out and fight with an Israelite man. Don't know what the punishment yet. We don't know what the punishment would have been for that, but the punishment for cursing and taking God's name in vain was capital punishment. Very serious thing to be done. And so, as we talk about that and the passage that Dustin mentioned just a moment ago, maybe we ought to think about what our language should be today. How is it that here those that were guilty of capital punishment just through the spoken word, how does that reflect, and what lessons should we learn based on that? So let's keep I think the lesson is that we keep our speech pure, seasoned with salt, that which would be pleasing to God. All right, so after that incident, Moses then talks about the famous eye for an eye passage. Let's look at verse 17 of Numbers 24. Verse 17 of Numbers 24. I don't have this on the overhead, but do want to talk about it. And if a man takes the life of any human being, he shall surely be put to death. And so, again, the statement about capital punishment and murder. And the one who takes the life of an animal shall make it good, life for life. And if a man injures his neighbor just as he has done, so it shall be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, just as he has injured a man, so it shall be inflicted on him. And so here is some information about what occurs as a result of injuries to someone. I kind of hesitate to bring this little story into it, but I think it probably has some application. I had a great uncle, two great uncles one time, and they were prone to drink alcohol and get drunk, and that side of the family was pretty bad about that. And so these two brothers did that. They were at this beer joint, and they did that, and they got into a fight. And one of my great uncles in that fight bit the other one's ear off. You gotta be pretty drunk to bite somebody's ear off, I would think.
Big Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
And Mike Tyson.
And so, if we were living under the law of Moses, then what would have to be done? Well, his ear would have to be taken off. So that shows the extent of the reparation that has to be made when this type of thing comes about. Not proud of that story of my family, by the way, but nonetheless, I think there's an illustration there to be seen. And so, when we talk about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, there's some practical, some practical illustration there. In verse 21, thus the one who kills an animal shall make it good, but the one who kills a man shall be put to death. And so there shall be one standard for you. It shall be for the stranger as well as the native, for I am the Lord your God. One standard of judgment. You know, we could take this passage right here and talk about how there is one truth, there's one faith, there's one God, there's one baptism. And we can make some application in regard to that. There's really a sermon in that verse there. But it has always been the case. God has always said there's one standard of judgment, there's one standard of law, and it comes from Jehovah. It does not come from some man. It does not come from something contrived from an idol. It comes from Jehovah. And so the native Israelite and the sojourner that lived in the camp with the Israelite were all to obey and follow after that one law and that one standard. When one chose to live among the Israelites, he was choosing to live by their laws. And that was whether they were native born or whether they were sojourners. And so that's the way it was to be. And so today, when we become Christians, we are to live by the law of Christ. You know, Paul made very clear that fact to those among whom he worked, that they and he and we, as Christians, are to live and abide by the law of Christ. There's one standard of judgment, and that has not changed. Now, God may have put this old covenant to bed, if you will, nailed it to the cross in connection with the death of Jesus Christ, but he brought forth a new law in Jesus. Any comments about 24 before we move on?
Jeremy,
Yes.
When we get to the New Testament, the Pharisees took this law of capital punishment and made it into a law of personal retaliation.
Yes.
And that was a misuse of it.
That's right. That's right. And, that was some of, as they went in and inhabited the land, maybe that was some of God's planning when he set out the cities of refuge.
Yeah.
Because he knew that kind of thing would
Yes.
happen.
Yes.
All right, Leviticus chapter 25 is a very interesting chapter from the standpoint that we learn about the 7 Sabbaths and 7 years of Sabbaths and the year of Jubilee and all of that. And so the year of Jubilee was very much a year of joy. It was a year of celebration from the standpoint that God had provided for the people all of this time. And so from the mount, Jehovah told Moses to instruct the people about a Sabbath unto him, when they came into the land of Canaan. Now, this first portion that this first Sabbath that he talks about is not the year of Jubilee. We'll get to that in just a moment. So let's don't confuse the two things. The Sabbath, this Sabbath, was to be for the 7th year after they entered the land which Jehovah gave them. So he said in verse 1, the Lord spake to Moses at Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, When you come into the land which I shall give you, then the land shall have a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard, and gather in its crop. So, pretty obvious. Leviticus 25 talks about sowing and reaping for 6 years. Verse 4, But during the 7th year the land shall have a Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not sow your field, nor prune your vineyard. Your harvest after growth you shall not reap, and your grapes of untrimmed vines you shall not gather. The land shall have a sabbatical year. And so here in the 7th year, it's a year of rest for the land. It's a year of rest of sowing and reaping, a year of rest of pruning and harvesting. And so that year was to be set aside so that the land could replenish itself. And today we do that by rotating crops. Okay, it's a little different type of thing. We're using a crop. Maybe after several years of planting corn or soybeans, a farmer will plant peanuts to try to replenish the soil. But the Lord said to his people, let that 7th year, the fields lie fallow. So they were to be given a rest. They were not to sow or prune, as we've just read. The poor and the sojourner were to eat what came in volunteer. All of the beasts and the cattle were allowed to eat of the volunteer crops as well. And so as he continues to state in verse 6, and all of you shall have the Sabbath products of the land for food, yourself and your male and female slaves and your hired man and your foreign resident, those who live as aliens with you, even your cattle and the animals that are in your land shall have all its crops to eat. You are also to count off 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, so that you have the time of 7 Sabbaths of years, namely 49 years. And so here's where we get into the year of Jubilee. And so the word Jubilee is from a Hebrew word meaning to blast on a ram's horn. Now, just to kind of illustrate this and what's done in modern times, down in the Bay of Mobile, at certain seasons, I don't know if it's the tide or what it is exactly, but occasionally there will be masses of seafood washed up on the shore. And so the residents that live along the beach there will see that, and generally it happens at night. Someone will be walking along the beach and they'll see all of this seafood on the beach. And the cry will go out, Jubilee. And up and down the beach, people will be hollering, Jubilee. And they'll come with their buckets and they'll get that seafood. And so that's just a modern day illustration that still happens today of what occurs in that. And so the idea and the principle behind that is from this great harvest that the Lord gives the people that we'll talk about here in just a second. But blasting or blowing on a ram's horn, it was a signal of a coming rest from sowing, reaping, slavery, borrowing, lending, all of those things. Now this trumpet blast came not in the year of Jubilee, or not at the beginning of Jubilee, but on the Day of Atonement preceding Jubilee. And so the people had time. The Day of Atonement was what? Do you remember what month?
10th year, 7th month.
Seventh month, 10th day.
I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Right.
7th month.
So in the 10th day of the 7th month,
Right.
the Day of Atonement came. And so the ram's horn blast would go forth, thus preparing the people for that 50th year, or the year of Jubilee. And so if I had sold myself to someone to be a hireling, or if I had sold a piece of land, let me take that back. If I'm an Israelite, I couldn't sell myself, really. I mean, I could indenture myself, if you will, to serve as a hireling, but they could not treat me as a slave. Okay, I was not a slave in those terms. Then, that year of Jubilee, I would be released. So many other things. I'm going to talk about the specifics of that in just a moment. This year of Sabbaths was to occur in the 50th year following their entrance into the land, and to continue every 50 years. Now, you can go and you can read from those that are supposed to be scholars and that type of thing, and say, some of them will say, well, you know, it took so many years for them to settle in the land, and so maybe the 50 years, the count for the 50 years started at that time. Well, the Lord says when you go into the land, so, you know, I have no doubt that it started from the time that they actually went into the land. So as I mentioned, in the 49th year, on the Day of Atonement, a loud trumpet was to be sounded throughout all the land. The year of Jubilee will be a year of holiness unto Jehovah. We talked about a holy convocation, very similar. This was a year that was spent in worship and holiness unto Jehovah. Slaves were set free. Lands returned to original settlers. Property could be redeemed by all who had sold that property. Now you say, well, what if these people were poor and they couldn't redeem it? Well, there was a way for that to happen as well. Just like the 7th year and the 50th year, the land was to lie fallow and get a rest from the previous years of produce. So there was a 7th year Sabbath that we talked about first, and then there was the 50th year of Jubilee, which was a year of Sabbath. There were various rules about redemption of houses in walled cities and houses in the country, along with the crops produced on the land. So I'm not going to be too detailed about going into that, but much like tax sales today in some parts of our country, now Alabama has a different law about that. I believe maybe Georgia has a 1-year rule, but anyway, not to get into all that. A house in the city that was sold because a person had to have money to live could be redeemed within a year. Anytime during that year, it could be redeemed. If it was not redeemed in that year, then it would go to the year of Jubilee and be redeemed freely. A house out in the country where a portion of land was, the house would go with the land, and so it had different rules about that. It would remain in the hands of those that bought it until the 50th year, the year of Jubilee. And so you say, well, if this is going to be another year after a 7th year, then how are the people going to eat? There's not going to be any volunteer that year. How are they going to eat in that 50th year? Jehovah would provide extra harvest in the 6th year. And this reminds me of what Joseph did down in Egypt.
Yes.
You know, they had those 7 years of plenty, and then they had 7 years of lean. And so they would stockpile, if you would, that food in the 6th year, after the 6 years harvest. That would supply them food for the 7th year. It would supply them food for the 8th year. And it would even supply them food for the 9th year until that 8th year's harvest came in the 9th year. Now, we talked about just a few minutes ago the Lord providing for his people.
Yes.
That's a provision.
Yes.
That's not something that just happens. And so we see that harvest brought in from the 6 years' produce that would last them for the 7th, 8th, and 9th years. Sowing would resume in the 8th year, and the people would eat of the 6 years' increase until the harvest of the 9th year, as I mentioned. Now, he also mentioned some rules about the sale of lands. The buying and selling of lands of Canaan was permitted, but the year of Jubilee allowed all original tenants of the land to return to their tribal land. You say, well, we really don't need to know about all this, but this is important. This is important so we see that this helped the people remain pure tribally. Not only were they Israelites, but they were set apart in different tribes. You remember this Israelite woman that had this son? She was of the tribe of Dan. And so with the recouping of those lands, they would go back and they would have their original tribal lands, and they would inhabit those, and that would help to keep that tribe pure and intact, especially in connection with the lineage of Christ and the tribe of Judah. We don't talk about that a lot when we talk about the lineage of Christ, but God kept that lineage pure generation after generation after generation. And part of that was through the law of Jubilee. The cities of the Levites. The Levites had the opportunity to redeem sold houses at any time. If they had sold a house for some reason or another to provide for something or someone, then they could redeem that at any time. Didn't matter if it was a house in the city, or if it was a house out in the field, or whatever it was, they could use that opportunity. They also could redeem their houses in the year of Jubilee, obviously. Their fields could not be sold, for they were a perpetual inheritance from Jehovah. And so in the cities of the Levites, just outside the towns there, outside the walled cities, they would have fields. So the Levites had those fields just outside the city so that they could help take care of themselves. Now recognize that not all Levites were priests. All priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests. So they would have to, those that were not priests would have to fend for themselves off the land, so to speak. The question about care for brethren comes up in relation to this. A brother that had fallen into poverty was to be helped by fellow Israelites. Now, what we do, fellow Christians today, Christians help fellow Christians when they're in difficult situations.
Yes.
He could not be charged interest or increase any money or food. Now, you will recall we talked about the 20% or the fifth part added to something because of sin. You know, in an offering, or if someone ate of if a sojourner ate of the priest's food, then he would have to return that plus 20%. Well, that was not the case in connection with care for poor saints, or poor Israelites, I should say. He could not be made to serve as a bondservant, only as a hired servant, and a sojourner until Jubilee. So that 50th year, he would be released back to, and when I say 50th year, I'm not talking about 50 years from the time he entered into service to this person that redeemed him. I'm talking about whenever that 50th year fell. If they went in and they hired themselves to this person on the 49th year, and the priest blew the ram's horn, then that next year he went free. And so the people who would redeem such a one would know that, and so that they would then help accordingly, knowing that they would not receive much service from that particular person. And that's what he goes on to talk about here in a little bit. The poor were servants of Jehovah, just as others. They were not to be sold as bondmen. They were not to serve with rigor. Bondmen and bondmaids were to be bought of the nations or sojourners not Israelites, and they would be bondservants forever, even to generations. So if, say my family were Israelites, and my father had purchased a slave from another nation, then that slave could actually be part of my inheritance if that slave lived that long. That day or the year of Jubilee had no connection with that particular nationality. If a poor Israelite is sold to a sojourner, he could be redeemed by brethren or his kin. He was to serve the one who redeemed him as a hireling, just as if he had indentured himself to that particular person until Jubilee. The redemption price was determined by the price paid, labor wages, and time left until Jubilee. And so that's the thing that I talked about long ago. Let's say, for example, it was in the 25th year, and I indentured myself to this man who redeemed my debt or whatever, paid off my debt. Then I would serve him 25 years until Jubilee. The same thing if it's in the 40th year, I'd serve him 10 years. And so he would pay my debt accordingly. If the wages of the day, and I'm just giving an example here, it was not that much, but if the wages of a day was $1, then he would pay 365 times 25 in that example, or times 10. He would not necessarily pay all of my debt if it was greater than that. So then I would be released at Jubilee and redeemed as a result. Any comments about that? Okay, let's go on to chapter 26. Leviticus 26 and verse 2 states, "You shall keep my Sabbaths and revere my sanctuary. I am the Lord." We've talked about the idea of profaning the sanctuary of the Lord. When an Israelite committed sin, when he did something that he did not offer sacrifice for, he did not come before and confess his sins to the priest and have that sacrifice offered, he was continually guilty of that sin, and he profaned not only the Lord and the Lord's service, but the tabernacle or the sanctuary. And so basically, if I had done that, what I would be doing is I would say, "Lord, I know you give me all this, you told me not to do this, but I've done it anyway, and I'm going to continue to do it." Basically what I'm saying is that what you've told me is not good for me. I've decided that I'm going to do what's good for me. So I have, in essence, profaned Jehovah. I have profaned the sanctuary. I have profaned the priesthood. I have profaned the people that he claimed as his own. And of course, I would be cast out as a result of that. But he continues to remind them that they are to be careful about those types of things. Don't form or fashion any idol or graven image. And in Leviticus chapter 26, at least in the New American Standard Translation, this is how it is rendered. Verse 1, "You shall not make for yourselves idols, nor shall you set up for yourselves an image or a sacred pillar, nor shall you place a figured stone in your land to bow down for it, for I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my statutes and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord." So here's something that is abomination to the Lord. Making these idols, fashioning these images, whether it was a golden calf or whether it was something that appeared to look like Molech or Baal or Ashtaroth or any of those other gods in the land of Israel, the land of Canaan to which they were going. They were not to do that, not to make any small handheld figures that they could carry around with them. And that reminded me of some things that we see in present day. You see these figures of Mary and figures of Jesus or what they were supposed to look like. And sometimes you even see those in little niches in people's house. They'll have a little niche and a little opening in the wall, and they'll have that little figurine there. So you see that in connection with modern day quote unquote worship. But our worship is not to be directed to mankind or any image of mankind or beast. It's to be directed to Jehovah. George, you have a comment?
Well, I'm reminded of several things, of course. Abraham's people ended up having idols like that because they took the idols when they moved out, and they didn't want to suffer the consequences of doing that. But then Romans chapter 1 talking about they worship the creation more than the creator. Just have a tendency that we have a tendency to worship our families, worship the money that we make, or the things that we have. Still a human tendency.
Right, that's right. In many cases, it is, no doubt. Yes, and remember when Jacob and his wives came back from Laban's, Rachel had some of those.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's what I was referring
He
to.
had those. And you also remember that Jacob collected them all and buried them before they went back to see his father. All right, I think we covered that. He said all would be well with them if they kept the Sabbaths and his sanctuary holy. Now while we're going through this, let's turn over to Amos chapter 9 for just a moment. Amos chapter 9, verse 13. The Lord made a number of promises to the people through Moses, and this was one of them. He promised them that as long as they served him and obeyed him, that all would be well with them. All you've got to do is serve me, obey me, keep my ordinances, offer the sacrifices, and revere me in my sanctuary. I will give you rain. I will increase your crops and your fruit. Can you imagine getting to the year of Jubilee and God not being with you? You'd starve to death, wouldn't you? Maybe not immediately, but you would. There would be no idle time between harvests. In Amos chapter 9, what Amos is doing is he's prophesying to the people that were in captivity, and he told them when they come out captivity, that 70 years of Babylonian captivity, and they go back and they clear out the land and they build their cities back and they plant their crops. He said, this is what's going to happen. Verse 12, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations who are called by my name, declares the Lord who does this. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the plowman will overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him that sows seed, when the mountains will drip sweet wine, and all the hills will be dissolved. So he's talking about the restoration of Israel there. You go back into the land, it's going to seem like that you're planting right behind the harvest, and you're reaping right behind the sowing. He says, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless you greatly. So that's what he promised the people here, previous to all of that business of them going into Babylonian captivity, years before that. I think perhaps the greatest blessing of all that God promises to his people is peace. Mm-hmm. How many of you like peace? Oh, I like peace. I like peace. I'm not a big fan of drama. Not a big fan of things going on that stir. He said there will be none to make afraid. You'll have sweet rest. Evil beasts will be removed from the land. There will be no sword through the land. Enemies shall fall before you as by a sword. 5 will chase 100, 100 will chase 10,000. He's strengthening the people. He's lifting them up. He's making them his own, and they are not a well-tuned fighting force, but they are God's people. They don't have to be a fighting force for. He is fighting for them, and will fight for them. So Jehovah multiplied their harvest and their families. Their store of food was vast, and the new crop harvested was abundant. And no matter about the year of Jubilee, no matter about the year of Sabbaths, they had plenty and to spare, because if they obeyed God, He would bless them greatly. And He did. The tabernacle was set before them, and Jehovah walked among them as their God, and they were His people. What a great blessing He had promised us if we just remain faithful. You talk about a harvest. You talk about peace. Just think what heaven's going to be like. George?
Everything God has given to us to do is for our good. All you got to look at is, if you obedient to Him, even in the workplace, of course I'll bring this up time and again, because you work as you're working for God, which is greater than what the people that you work for demand, but it pays off very much in the end. And I can say that with experience.
Yes. Now,
In verse 9 there of chapter 26, I think should be mentioned that, for I will have respect unto you in the King James Version. What does your version say there?
in verse 9 of 26, at the last phrase there says, I will confirm my covenant with you.
I'm talking about the first part.
Okay. So I will turn toward you and make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will confirm my covenant with you.
Yeah, and King James says, I will look favorably on you. Some may say something like, I will bless you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is, God is no respecter of persons. I think that needs to be clarified right there, that He can show favor to any people.
Right.
It doesn't mean He showed favor to Babylon.
Yes.
It means He respected them.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point to be made. Protecting His people. Yes.
Well, back in Acts 10 with Cornelius, Peter makes a confession that God does not respect persons, but all that, let's paraphrase it, reverence Him and obeys Him is acceptable with Him.
That's right. Okay, appreciate your comments and your attention this morning. We're going to stop there. Lord willing, on Wednesday evening, we'll begin with chapter 26, verse 14. Chapter 26 and verse 14. Thank you.